And what's happening, everyone? Welcome on into the Check Your Brain podcast on this Wednesday. My name is Tony Mazur, and I am pleased to be joined by two of my favorite people, not just because they patronize me on my Patreon, which you can do at patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur. You can subscribe for free, or $3, $5, $10, or you could just listen again for free on the podcast platforms, the podcatchers, if you will, on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you're watching on the video, there, go check it out here. But I also have another gentleman who has a podcast, and that's the FDH Lounge podcast, frequent guest of the Check Your Brain podcast, and that is Rick Morris. Rick, good to have you on here.
Thanks, bud. Good to be here. Really appreciate it.
Yes, the FDH Lounge. You can go check it out on Apple Podcasts. Where can we go for all things fantasy draft help and all things Rick Morris?
FantasyDraftHelp.com, of course, the sister site. That's the one that the FDH Lounge peeled off of. And then, just recently celebrated our 18th anniversary. Back, of course, in the old Sports Talk Network days with you back at the station, Tony. That was where we started. We've kept it going over the years. And much like what you're doing here, we just made our return to video recently as well. So the show where nothing is off topic, but the one topic, as I look at the statistics we talk about the most, is football. So it's a natural to be here with you.
Which we will be doing here on the podcast. I've known Rick now for, 18 years.
Yeah.
I have not known this next man as long, but it feels like I have, and that is Ken Mosca. Ken, get his plug out there. Go check out facesforautism.org there. He is on the board of directors. And Ken, thanks for joining us. And talk a little bit quickly about Faces for Autism.
I will, Tony. First of all, it's always good to be with you. Rick, really nice to meet you as well.
Yes, Ken, thanks.
We are in our 24th year, as Tony knows. Our twins turned 26 on Super Bowl Sunday. We're in our 24th year at Faces. As Tony said, we are Faces #4autism.org. If you would like to contribute, we service over 750 families a year. My wife is the executive director. I am the secretary because I'm a really good typist, I think. And I'm in the midst of planning our big comedy night, which we have every July. And I have one comic kind of lined up, and I don't want to name who the headliner would be because it's not squared away yet. But
it doesn't rhyme with Vitch Ross, does it?
It does not. But this guy does not like ketchup. So, at least not for adults. So I'm working on that.
Well, Ken and I used to do a football podcast, and not anymore, but I think a lot of it also had to do with my poor prognostication skills. I got this past weekend wrong with the Super Bowl, and didn't do too well with my picks, so don't listen to me when it comes to picking football games. However, Ken, being a Cowboys fan, and Rick, though from my neck of the woods here in Ohio, is also a Dolphins fan. Before we get to everything, I have to get your guys' thoughts. Where were you? What were your thoughts when I pull this clip up here? And I'm going to play this just really quick here for you guys.
Go in the win column to Dallas or Miami. Stoyanovich will decide it as he will try this field goal.
Leon Lett.
40 yards. 40 yards. Doug Peterson. Blocked. The Cowboys will win.
Wait a minute.
Will was in the end zone. No one covered it, and Miami did. That could be a touchdown if Miami has covered it.
A Dallas player touched the ball, and then the Dolphins went on and recovered it.
It's on the 1-yard line. It's not in the end zone. It's in the 1-yard line.
They're going to sort it out.
And there's 3 seconds left on the clock.
92, Tolbert gets his hand up in the air and knocks the ball. No, it's not 92, it's 97.
Jimmy Jones.
Now someone touches the football here. Watch what happens. It's Leon Lett. No!
Oh, Lett, who is haunted by a Super Bowl misplay. And the ball goes into the end zone, they say. Stoyanovich.
Leon Lett, who, just a few months earlier, almost a year earlier, had ran the ball back, took a fumble all the way back towards the end zone, was at the 1-yard line. Don Beebe, one of the great moments in the history of I will say the history of the NFL. Game's already lost. Beebe runs down the field, knocks the ball out of Leon Lett's hands. And what does he do? Well, he has a nice topper there by touching the ball. Ken, let me ask you, what were your thoughts? I know you don't have a lot of hair right now, but I'm assuming you had a full head of hair by then.
I had a lot more. Yeah, look, I had a lot more hair back then, Tony. You remember that was Thanksgiving night, right? That game was Thanksgiving
93.
night. That was Thanksgiving night. So I was with my family, right? It was Thanksgiving night. I know I'm old now, but I mean, it was Thanksgiving night, Thanksgiving game, and we're all together, and all of us in the room are Cowboys fans, and it's blocked. It's blocked, and we're like, oh my God, yeah, But you saw Aikman and Michael Irvin hugging. Then all of a sudden, you see Aikman looking, towards the end zone with that look on his face, and we're like, wait, what's going on? And then, you heard. I'm trying to think of the announcer's
Dick
name.
Enberg?
Dick Enberg and the punter the punter for Cincinnati was? Yeah, I can't even think of his name. What's his name? The color commentator. But he I guess, sorry, I just can't think of his name. So he said, wait, there's something going on there. And we're like looking. Well, you saw the rest of it. Now, the backstory later on was Leon Lett, when the game was over, left the stadium, ripped his uniform off, left the stadium. They could not find him that night. He was for sure felt that Jimmy would cut him, that Jimmy Johnson would cut him. So they had an all points bulletin out for Leon Lett. And they found him many hours later, just unconsolable. And they took him back to Jerry, and Jerry assured him that he would not be cut. If you recall, look, Leon had some bonehead plays, like we we're just saying. He was a great, great player for a period of years there. And, he was an integral part of that defense that won Super Bowls and won a lot of games. So that's where I was.
So, Rick, you being the Dolphins fan, this was the strange year that at the beginning of the season, many picked the Dolphins to go to the championship. Shula's in his final couple of seasons. However, just up the road from us here in Cleveland with the bad turf, Dan Marino tears his Achilles, and Scott Mitchell has to come in there. And though he brought them to some respectability that season and got a massive contract with Detroit afterward, but that was a very strange season, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And this is what I'll never forget it. Like at the end of when the Tribe was playing there in 93, I just remember thinking to myself, like, what's the big deal about just leaving the diamond there the rest of the season? Like, I don't know that I necessarily thought it was dangerous, but you'll never convince me after the fact that it wasn't dangerous. You rip everything up, you put the new sod in. I will go to my grave blaming that for what happened to Dan Marino.
Really? So did they roll sod on top of the field or something?
Yeah. Like if you go to look and you see, it wasn't like the usual, late season thing where you still have the outline of the pitcher's mound and the outfield and whatever. Everything past the end of when the Tribe was there, it was all new sod or whatever it was. And again, supposedly it doesn't necessarily always take root the best way, whatever. I've always blamed it on that, fairly or unfairly, but it's easy to take the old shot there at Art Modell because we can't say that he doesn't deserve it many times over. That's why I'm wearing the old Kozar Cowboys jersey in tribute here. But, it's safe to say my reaction was, I'm sure, the opposite end of the spectrum of what Ken's was to watching that on Thanksgiving Day.
I didn't realize
Tony, that was one of the only stadiums that did that would roll out that grass late in the season. You look at when they played at the old Shea Stadium, the Yankee Stadium, when they did have games in Milwaukee, the Bears would sometimes play games in Milwaukee and things like that. The diamond was there, the dirt was there. They never put that, put grass on top of that because it would not root, and it was dangerous.
I didn't realize that because I just saw it. It was October of 93, and I think it was October 3rd of 93 was the final game. The White Sox shut out the Cleveland Indians. The last batter, by the way, who struck out was former Cleveland Indian utility infielder Mark Lewis. Wonder what he's doing nowadays.
Wow.
But anyways.
Listen, that's a legend right there, huh?
Just throwing that out there for a couple of folks might be interested in that little bit of tidbit. But yeah, so they used to have that infield, so they rolled turf out there. And yeah, Marino on bad turf just And then, of course, it eventually comes back and has a MVP caliber season the next year, out-dueling Bledsoe. But my goodness, yeah. So at least you guys did experience some success as being a Browns fan. We didn't really get too much back in the day, but well, we'll talk about some other football things and everything. Let's just get to the Super Bowl. Let's get to the season that was. So for folks who've listened to this podcast, I had Rick on last year to recap the year that was of 2023, and then I had Ken on to preview the NFL season that would be in 2024. And we got a lot of the predictions pretty good. Baltimore is going to do well. However, Rick, the Dolphins with Tua, he got injured quickly. They went in the crapper pretty quick and didn't really work out too well. What do you see going forward? Is McDaniel good? Is he on the hot seat, or are they just going to keep this going with Tyreek Hill and maybe just chalk this up as a bad season?
Well, I mean, McDaniel may be on the hot seat at a certain point, but if so, that's an indictment of the organization, because when I look at the coach GM combo, it's Chris Greer that's not holding up his end of the bargain. I keep looking at this guy like, what would you say you do here? Because, they got a lot of holes on defense that just aren't getting any better. And the whole thing too, I had optimism with Tua coming into the year, but then, the minute he went down, like, I just want him to retire, because, the guy's going to end up with a drool cup. Nobody wants to see that. He's a wonderful guy. Walk away with some dignity here at this point. Well, you can still, literally walk. But ironically, I thought it was going to be Miami's defense that was going to hold them back this year. I was not buying into what everybody said. Oh, this is the year they could take out Buffalo. I picked Buffalo to win that division purely out of, essentially a process of elimination, because I didn't trust anybody else in the division. And that's kind of basically how it played out.
So then let's go to the NFC in Ken with you could start with the Cowboys if you want to. If you don't want to, that's fine. But looking at how your division was, it was pretty tough. You're dealing with obviously the Super Bowl champion Eagles. You had the Giants that not a good season. They had to deal with the fallout of losing Saquon Barkley, and it's really up in the air. But then also Washington, I'll still call them the Redskins. I don't care. Cancel me. I'm already canceled. That they really came out of nowhere and became this Cinderella story. What were your thoughts on the NFC? Were you surprised by Philly's run here, and especially with what culminated in the Super Bowl the other day?
Philadelphia got off to what, a 3-2 start or 2-2 start, and people were going crazy. My friends, I'm surrounded by Eagles fans and stuff like that all over here, South Jersey. But my friends were saying, they can't stand Jalen Hurts. And I would say I would take him. I told him 3 years ago I would take him over Dak Prescott today. And I was saying that, when the Eagles got off to the 2-2 start, I knew they were good. I knew they had skilled players. What I was concerned about was the head coach. I think he was developing. He was a young head coach. His introductory press conference is legendary because it was awkward. He still gets criticized for it. He's obviously grown into the job. I really want to talk about the Eagles and the Super Bowl, but I'll finish up this on the division because this is one thing I like. I'm a Cowboys fan. My brothers are Cowboys fans, and they were rooting for Kansas City. They hate Philadelphia. I don't hate Philadelphia. I like their team. There's a lot of players on that team I like. I do like the coach. He's grown on me. I like the general manager. I like the owner for a couple of reasons. One, with all the work he's done in autism and things like that. So, and my wife, being from Philly, my kids are all Phillies. They're all Philadelphia sports fans. They're Eagles fans. I was pulling for Philadelphia. The morning of the Super Bowl, the day before the Super Bowl, I was taking my older brother to the airport. He's down in Tampa. And he goes, well, what do you think? And I said, if it's a close game, it's going to be Kansas City. I just don't trust the officials. And Kansas City seems to win close games. I said, Bill, I really think that Philadelphia has an opportunity. If they can turn over Kansas City, I never said Mahomes and pick sixes or anything like that. I said, if they can turn over Kansas City early, no field goals, touchdowns, they're going to blow them out. And I was right. I'm not a gambler. Didn't put money on it except for one prop bet, and that was the national anthem, which I won. And I was texting with our good friend Gino Bisconte, or at least my good friend. I don't know where you stand with him.
I'm fine with Gino.
I know you are. I know. So, I really felt that. And they just outclassed them. Outclassed them. It was a really outstanding Philadelphia team. They didn't blitz not one time. You guys probably know that, not one time. They rushed their 4 guys. They sacked them 6 or 7 times, I forget. And we know the rest of the story. Just real quick on the division. Just real fast on the division. I've said for years, and some of my friends have laughed at me, the NFC East is the best division of football. Because some of those teams could be terrible, but they play the crap out of each other when they play each other. That's just the way it is.
I mean, when was the last time you saw the NFC East have less than one team in the playoff? There's usually a wild card team or two that ends up making it to the playoffs.
Tony, when I was a kid, the St. Louis Cardinals won the division. 3 teams a year were going to the playoffs. 3 teams a year. Look, the fact is, it's the best division of football, Rick, and I'll say it like this. I'm really interested in your take on this. Because with the Eagles win on Sunday, approximately 23%, close to 24% of all Super Bowl victories reside in the NFC East. 14 of them.
There is that. But I mean, if we're looking just at this year, I would say, all due respect, the NFC North says hi.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
That's one where, and I'm a guy where on my show, I've proclaimed that the best division in the league, this year's version of it, since probably, I would say, remember when the NFC West, somewhere in the 2010s, was, you had the Seahawks and the Niners, and then somehow or another, the Rams and the Cardinals were both at a point of being relatively decent, I think, at that point. So it's a thing where, but I do hear you on the NFC East, and it is one of these things of nature abhors a vacuum. The Cowboys fall off, but then Washington ends up coming up, the good old Redskins there. And I will say, coming into this year, this is one of those things where, because one of the things I do a guide for the draft for fantasydrafthelp.com, looking at the NFL draft, and one of the things I look at, and then I update for the regular season in our fantasy draft guide, is looking at the holes on every team here and what they do to address them. And one of the things, this must have been apparent to you as a Cowboy fan, is that they were letting the stars and scrubs thing get way out of hand coming into this year. I didn't see another team in the league that had the number of holes that they did, but everybody seemed kind of mesmerized by it. Like, oh, look at the star power of Parsons. But it's like, and then when they started getting injuries, what happened was eminently predictable. I picked them for like 8 wins at the beginning of the year, and I felt like a giant outlier, and they ended up winning, 7? So that's how it went.
I think, Tony, when you and I kicked off the year, I think, what did I say, 8-9, 9-8?
Oh, you saw it too. Okay.
Yeah, I said, something like that. I think it was 8-9, 9-8.
And we also said that if the Cowboys are going to make a run, it's this year. This is it. And sure enough, it's you have no choice right now. You have absolutely no choice to rebuild, to realize that this, whatever they were going for the last couple of years, you're not going to run it back. And it's time to retool this team. And I understand Cowboys Nation's not going to be happy about it, but what's the alternative? You're just going to continue winning 6, 7, 8 games a year, maybe contend for a wild card, or how about maybe get a couple of new draft picks, maybe try to start something new. It just seems like the Cowboys method. There's some teams that always do this. I always look across this in pro sports. And Rick, you're a Red Wings fan. How many years the Red Wings had this feeling of, we got to make the playoffs, and if we make the playoffs, let's just qualify, and whatever happens, happens. However, how long has it been since they won the Stanley Cup? So they would always just continue trying to be relevant and make the playoffs, as opposed to, guys, maybe we'll have to go with the Sam Hinkie method. Maybe we're going to have to suck for a couple of years, but we're going to come back. We're going to try and retool this and get back on track. And Cowboys just seem to be one of those teams. The Steelers do it too. You have other teams in baseball, like the St. Louis Cardinals. They're never bad, but they're not winning championships every year. And what's the goal here? Just to get to the playoffs or to win championships?
Well, yeah. And that was my big criticism with that stupid Ken Holland there towards the end, was that let's just make it to the first round of the playoffs. And I'm sitting here as a Wings fan, like, that is not the standard. And that's why we've sucked for as long as we have. Only recently in the last, 2 years or so, relatively speaking, kind of pulling out of that because of, the rebuilding process. So like once you've decided to be mediocre and just keep 25 years in a row making the playoffs, who cares? Who gives a crap? Because then you're going to bottom out and you're going to be a joke and everybody's going to be, people are waiting a long time to be able to point and laugh at my Red Wings, and they got a chance to do so copiously over the course of the last couple of years. So you're absolutely right, Tony. But that's
by the way, how did that work for the Atlanta Braves? They talked about how many years they won the AL or the NL East. They had one championship to call for it. So you're going to say, "Well, look at all the pennants." Yeah, all the pennants mean you qualified, but you didn't. You won once, and it was a strike affected year, and everything kind of all the planets aligned. So, what do you care about at the end of the day? The fact that you won in '95, or you went to the playoffs 14 straight years? I would prefer more championships than being relevant.
I'll tell you this, though. We were worse than the Braves in that respect towards the end, because the Braves were, at least generally speaking, making the World Series, at least up until, 99, and not getting the job done. The Red Wings weren't making out of the first round in the years when they were running on fumes there towards the end. So I see your point, but it makes me even more depressed about my Red Wings because we're even more of a failure than those Braves were.
Ken, you're a Rangers fan, right?
I am a Rangers fan,
okay.
Yes, and we're struggling right now. I really had high hopes for this year, and it's been a struggle.
We're dueling for that spot, Ken.
I know.
But I've penciled you guys in. I'm like, the Rangers are going to make it, so we got to make one other team fall out of the race.
So let's look at the Chiefs now. So what has it been? 8 different teams, 1-2 straight, but not one team has three-peated in the history of the Super Bowl. The closest we had was Lombardi before it was called the Super Bowl. And ever since then, you had your Dolphins, and you had a couple of times the Steelers and the 49ers, the Patriots. All these other teams had an opportunity to win 3. Yeah, exactly. Won Cowboys. 3 straight, and it just didn't happen. Yeah, with Cowboys with Jimmy Johnson leaving. Where do they go from here? Is this just one of those you write it off? Yeah, we had a bad game. We'll be back next year, because you're dealing with Travis Kelce's in his mid-30s. There's potential he might be hanging it up. How much longer is this Patrick Mahomes thing? Is he going to continue padding his stats and becoming one of the greatest, if not the greatest player ever? Eventually, does Andy Reid get to that point where he's, it's like he's been in the league for a long time. Maybe he wants to hang it up. And then it gets to the point of fatigue with the fan base. Taylor Swift is booed at the Super Bowl. When they go to a commercial break, it's an Andy Reid commercial, it's a Travis Kelce commercial, it's a Patrick Mahomes commercial. It gets to a point of oversaturation for a lot of people, and they started turning into the evil empire. So, Ken, I'll ask you first, what's the future of the Chiefs? Are they back next year, or are we starting to see the slow decaying of this team?
Well, keep in mind, Tony, look, they're going to be very competitive next year. Let's be clear on it. They're going to be very competitive. Keep in mind their division. The Chargers are coming on. The Broncos, the coach turned them around real fast. The Raiders are the Raiders, but they have a new coach in what's his name?
Pete Carroll.
Thank you, Pete Carroll. I was drawing a blank on Pete Carroll. So their division is going to be tougher. They're not. I don't think they're going to go 15-2 next year. I think the Eagles put a blueprint out there, as did Tampa Bay a few years ago, when although that offensive line for Kansas City a couple of years ago, when they lost Tampa Bay, that offensive line was broken down, injuries, and they had third stringers in there. A different story than this past Sunday, but they were just manhandled. And when you have Mahomes on the run, he's a different quarterback, and he was on the run. And you saw it. He was on the run. They won a lot of close games this year, and we can debate till the cows come home the calls that they got during the season. I do believe they got a lot of really good calls. But your question was, where are they? Where do they go from here? Kelsey's down near the end. He's down near the end. Let's figure that out. I mean, let's say that. He's down near the end. Mahomes is still a top 5 quarterback, okay? Top 5 quarterback. They got a top 5 running back. Their defense has been pretty darn good this year. If we really look at, key spots and stuff like that. But when you're exposed the way you're exposed, again, along that offensive line, that's where they have to look. So I think you're looking at offensive line help. You're going to look at tight end help again. And I really think they need Tyreek Hill back. Okay. I don't think I think Hill, he may have worn out his welcome in Miami, but Rick knows more about that than I do. A bit of a diva there. But look, Kansas City's going to be competitive, and they just need to make, I think, those changes. They need another stretch receiver, I think. But they got to protect Mahomes. Last few years, he's been getting beaten up.
Yeah, because the other thing with when you get to a point of being this good and being respectable is you're going to get a lot of these, I don't want to say cast-offs, but they're good players, but it's everybody wanting to ring chase. And you're going to have to be dubious of that. So if someone like a Juju Smith-Schuster, who wore out his welcome in Pittsburgh, eventually came over, has been pretty successful, but you're going to have a lot of these guys wanting to be a part of it, just random players who've been cast-offs on other teams, and what's your best opportunity to win a ring? You try to run it back with the Chiefs here. But Rick, talking about the AFC, you still have Lamar Jackson, who I think all of us were very skeptical of for the first couple of years. He did win the MVP in his second year, but he won the MVP on his legs. Last year, he won the MVP because he actually learned how to become a quarterback and arguably could have won a third MVP, but I don't know. I think there was a little bit of voter fatigue. They gave it to Josh Allen, who had a better season last year than he did this year.
And who also had less help. That might have been, a good part too.
So you also have Josh Allen, and you're having a little bit of a sea change and some pretty solid quarterback play from the AFC right now. Are we back here next year? Are we talking Kansas City, Buffalo? Are we talking Kansas City, Baltimore? Is this what we're going to have? Is this kind of like one of those times where, I'm going to use another baseball example, but in the 90s, it was always like the Yankees versus it was either the Indians or the Orioles or the Mariners. And it just seemed like all three of those teams just could not punch through that Yankees dynasty.
Well, it could be. A lot of times I'm looking at who the sort of dark horse is. And I will say, coming into this season, myself and my fellow FDH Lounge dignitary, Chris Galloway, both, and we didn't run this past each other ahead of time. We go to do our annual preview here. Both of us picked Cincinnati to win the Super Bowl over Philadelphia. And that was a thing because Burrow's coming back. They're sleeping on that. Neither one of us knew how bad that Cincinnati defense was going to be. And that Mike Brown with his approach, Mike Brown is a glorified Jerry Jones at this point with the stars and scrubs thing. And it's a shame because it's going to take out, a good team there. I'm focused on a team. I guess the 2025 version of that might be Houston because they still won their division, but it was a step back. DeMeco Ryans, I think, is one of the great emerging coaches in this league. He's got some work to do after this past season, but I think everybody's kind of selling on Houston at this point, so I kind of like them. I like them more than I like Buffalo and Baltimore because I'm relieved in the Super Bowl to see this, that the whole thing of like Jalen Hurts and the Eagles and whatever. I said on our Super Bowl preview show, he's not in the same boat. They're not in the same boat with Buffalo and Baltimore. Those are teams that have, and the Super Bowl proved it. They've had looks at Kansas City over the years, and neither one of them has converted on it. Philadelphia converted on their second one that they had, and arguably would have converted on the first one had it not been for that hinky pass interference call in the red zone. Great Philadelphia point. Could be 2 for 2 against them. So Buffalo and Baltimore, I think, are guilty until proven innocent on that one. I agree with everything that Ken said about the Chiefs. Their general manager has basically said, look, the draft is going to be our free agency, and that's understandable with their cap situation. I think they're going to look in exactly the directions that Ken was talking about with offensive line and tight end and try to shore up in those areas. And I think they're going to be right back in the conversation next year. But I know you're a lot of times also focused on things culturally, Tony, and I will say culturally, the whole thing of the evil empire, it will never be the same. Because it's a thing where everything was really kind of building into this moment. I saw some boohoo piece on Vogue today about, Taylor Swift getting booed is a national tragedy. And it's a thing where, but this writer was admitting in the same piece that it was a thing of like, well, it was changing the NFL and it was really feminizing things and that's the whole thing is that like, I can't relate to guys who watch The Bachelor, but guys who watch The Bachelor watch it on its own terms. They don't try to make it The Bachelor for guys. There have been women all along, your lovely bride among others, Tony, who've watched football, who don't need it dumbed down for them, who never needed it dumbed down for them. This attempt to change the game into something that's just one more part of all of this sort of culturally, and that is deader than a doornail after the Super Bowl, and I couldn't be happier about that.
Yeah, it was nice to see. Yeah, as I said on my Patreon podcast, I talked about the halftime show and everything. Go check it out if you want. If you want to subscribe at patreon.com/Tony
Yeah, go
Mazur.
listen to that. Go listen to that. It was very good.
The Super Bowl is the new variety show because the halftime show and the commercials are not for the people who are watching the Super Bowl. So what are we going to watch? We have all these different streaming services and different channels. All the way for 40 years now, we've been dealing with cable TV that you don't have to watch everything on network TV if you don't have to. And now you have on your phone. You can watch a previous Super Bowls while you're watching the current Super Bowl. So what is the cultural event that's going to bring us all together? It's not going to be the season finale of a show, whether you're a Yellowstone fan or Better Call Saul or whatever. The entire country is not aligned because we have so many different options. So what is it? It's the Super Bowl. So the NFL did try to exploit the Taylor Swift thing. They tried to bring in different audiences who wouldn't normally be watching this game. And it was interesting seeing this going forward. That is the NFL going to continue being this dominant force? There was a little bit of a downturn in 2017 when there was the kneeling controversy where some of the guys were kneeling in solidarity with Colin Kaepernick, and you started seeing a little bit of a ratings dip. And immediately, I don't know if it was Roger Goodell or somebody involved in the NFL said, stop showing them on the sidelines kneeling. Then all of a sudden, guys stopped kneeling because they were realizing they were doing it for attention. Then the juggernaut continued, and the NFL is what it is, and now it's setting records for TV. Does this continue? I mean, there have been talks about how the NBA is tapping into younger Gen Z culture, and but nobody seems to really care all that much.
They better tap in more quickly, Tony. The NBA is just falling apart. Their ratings are so far down. Now people are saying that the three-point shot has, I know this is a football recap, but the three-point shot is ruining the game. Okay. The NBA, and I'm a Knicks fan, and I'm enjoying their run the last few years, but yeah, it's really, really hard to watch. But like you're saying, I agree with everything you're saying, about the Super Bowl and Taylor Swift. And keep in mind, Netflix is next up to do NFL football.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look where we're at. Okay. Look, it's billions of dollars that the NFL is making, billions of dollars. And I just wonder how they're doing paying the health insurance for all those players from many years ago who are suffering mentally, physically. Some are, as some are homeless. Are they helping those people out? I know there was that big lawsuit, but don't want to go down that rabbit hole with you. But yeah, the whole cultural thing of the NFL since 2017 did rebound, and now of course you have the Taylor Swift effect.
And if I can piggyback on that, Ken, there is a thing here where you see a lot of the. And I'm going to paint with a broad brush and talk about 99% of the folks with big accounts who talk about politics on Twitter, and just refer to them as grifters, because that's how I see all of them, sort of regardless of what their point of view is, because some would allegedly have a point of view similar to mine, and I may still snarl at it based on what they're saying and the cheap way that they're going about it. I remember a lot of people, I don't kneel for the NFL. People calling for folks to boycott the NFL are now using the NFL as a club to bash the NBA. And they've never since, Clay Travis is one that comes to mind right there. I don't think he ever renounced what he said about the NFL. So it's like there are people taking shots at the NBA that are just being very, very convenient in how they're doing it. And it is interesting. I mean, there are things that they could do about the modern game and everything like that. You could always kind of get rid of the corner three shots there. I kind of like it, but I mean, as a Cavs fan, you'd expect me to like the status quo.
I'm not saying that I don't like it, but it's just there's a 3-on-1 fast break, and the guy in the middle with the ball pulls up for a straight ahead 3-pointer.
Yeah,
you got two guys on the wing, 3-on-1 fast break. You know what I mean? And
it's analytics, Ken.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was the James Harden. I talked about this many years, that the James Harden feeling of the, you're doing the Euro step, you do that hesitation dribble, and you're shooting a jump shot from 30 feet out. It
Yeah.
changed the game. And
Yeah.
the Splash Brothers that for the last decade of setting up, and because that trickles down to kids. So now you're having 10-year-olds. There's no 3-point line in some of these areas, and there's kids who are like, no, I want to shoot like Steph Curry. So a
Yeah.
lot of that trickles down. I am noticing something very interesting about the direction of sports in today's world of streaming and just how we access sports nowadays. The NFL is still the juggernaut where you're not from Jacksonville and you're not from Carolina, yet if those two teams will face each other, you're still at a bar watching it, drinking a beer and going like, these two teams stink, but I'm still watching it because of these small sample size of games, relatively speaking. The NBA is a very online game where if you're watching ESPN, they're talking about NBA constantly, but the ratings don't reflect that. Then it comes to Major League Baseball, which is a very regional sport. So if you're a fan of the team once known as the Cleveland Indians, and they're not playing, you're not watching. If the New York Mets are not playing right now, you are not watching. So it's a very hyper regionalized sport, which is odd because because we're talking about a global multi-billion-dollar franchise, all of them now at this point, with the way the value is in the TV ratings and the TV contracts are. It's amazing how globalized that is. Yet in baseball, it's regionalized. That outside of a certain radius, you couldn't care less who's on TV unless it's your team playing.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I mean, baseball is sort of a glorified version of hockey at this point, because hockey is sort of gone down that silo as well. And I love both sports a lot, but I mean, it's painful for me to discuss them in the same breath because I'm old enough, I'll really date myself here, that baseball was arguably still the biggest thing in this country when I was a kid, and long since, hasn't been the case. And it just, you look at all that. I will say the one thing about the NBA ratings is they did have a pretty massive Christmas. They've gone up since then. And so the gap is kind of narrowing vis-a-vis where they were previous seasons here. But yeah, I mean, they are having issues there, and they are going to have to find a way to address that.
How about this guy saying he's dating himself, Tony? Rick, I'm 64, so I go back a lot of years. I can remember getting my heart broken in the ice bowl. Okay.
Okay.
So
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
that's how far back I go.
I'm always reticent about bringing up that my parents took me when I was a little kid to the Miracle of Richfield, because I know I cringe at people doing the math at that, Ken.
Well, I mean, Rick, understand on our football podcast, no one talked about Earl Morrall more than us.
Okay.
Rule number 15.
Ken, with you being a New York Mets fan, and you saw what the Mets had to do to try to recruit not just Pete Alonso back to the team, but Juan Soto. Then you have the Cleveland, formerly known as the Indians, who are their big offseason acquisition is new seats in the stadium, and it that's going to play a lot because the Ohtani, the Dodgers, and they're signing everybody. There's no salary cap. Is this turning people off? I mean, we're all big baseball fans, but there's a lot of people who are watching the MLB right now and going, it's just not fair. This is not fair that the Dodgers are recruiting everybody and everybody else is left with the scraps. This is just ridiculous.
Well, one of those other team owners, look, I get it. Big market, mid-market, small market. I get all that. Okay. But what are those other owners doing? It's like that in the NFL with some of those owners. All those years, Modell was putting that TV money in his pocket, as other owners were doing. Leonard Tost with the Eagles, Norman Brayman with the Eagles. I can name a whole bunch of them. Okay, so what are these owners doing with the baseball money? How are they growing their own market? There's ways to grow your business. Look what Jerry did. Cowboys are not worth, the billions are worth now. Obviously, it was a different time 30-something years ago when he paid $141 million for everything. But look at what he did in the surrounding area. Look at all the other NFL teams, and there's a lot of them, the latest being Philadelphia, that are growing the area. New stadiums, restaurants, hotels, mixed-use places. Jerry did that. They're doing it in Vegas. They want to do it in Dallas with the Mavericks now. The Mavericks want to do their thing. Philadelphia, you got to grow your market. Tony, I get it. There's teams out there like the Marlins. There shouldn't be professional baseball, Major League Baseball in Florida. Just neither team draws. And the Marlins won 2 World Series.
Yep.
The next year, the teams are broken up. There's a cause and effect there. And I think ownership is a big part of it.
It's not. Well, in Florida especially, it's not sustainable. And Arizona's the fact that they're able to keep teams right now, because the Diamondbacks who went to 2 World Series won one of them, and still, I never met an Arizona Diamondbacks fan.
Yeah, I don't get that either. Look, baseball belongs in Montreal. Okay, there should be a major league team in Montreal. I believe there will be a team in Montreal someday, and Tennessee is next up. Okay?
Eventually,
that's coming, and maybe they can move the Marlins, and maybe they can move Tampa to those areas. I don't think we need more teams. Just put them in the right spot.
The business of sports in general has drastically changed, even in the last 10 years now. So, Rick, I'll ask you, because I haven't really talked too much about college football and college sports, but with this NIL, these players getting paid, this has changed college football. It's now become basically like the old, like the USFL now, where there are players who are major. So let's say you're a Major League Baseball player. You got drafted in the 10th round of the MLB draft, and you're a decent catcher. You can make your way through the organization, but you played high school football, and a college is recruiting you, and you say, well, I was a 2-sport athlete in high school. I can make more money playing college football than I would playing minor league baseball right now, with a potential of getting to the pros. So things have just drastically changed in the last decade as far as all sports, and that includes college.
What do they call?
I mean, in fairness, go ahead, Ken.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I said, what do they call? They used to be called athletic directors. They're now called Mike Lombardi. He's the general manager of that North Carolina Tar Heel football team where Belichick's coaching. They're called general managers now on the college level, where they're going out and recruiting kids with their checkbooks. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, no, Andrew Luck's actually the GM now at Stanford. So you're getting examples of that. And that was, I saw a lot of people take notice of this for the first time over the summer when we got the last Woj bomb, when he went off to Seton Hall, I guess, to become their general manager for basketball. But about the minor league baseball, I mean, look, you could, I don't know if it's a better job, but you could make more money probably working the mop down at the gentleman's club than you could being a minor league baseball player, because they rip you off just in really, really bad shape. But that's, quality of life factors, and I'd rather play baseball. But as far as it goes with the college thing, though, the best example that I can give is I used to make this joke when CJ Stroud was at Ohio State. And I would say the difference between then and now is, back then, you would say, sotto voce, I heard the quarterback of Ohio State's driving a Bentley. Today you say, I heard the quarterback at Ohio State's driving a Bentley.
Yeah.
So really, if you're going to be cynical like me, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's just legal now, quote unquote.
And the quarterback for University of Colorado was driving a Bentley.
Yes.
He has a Bentley.
The things that they're doing, and the money that they're getting and everything like that. And it just it is a whole new world. And this is one of the things where we have yet to really see it play out that much, where it really affects player decisions as far as whether they're going to stay or whether they're going to go in the NFL. Because the conventional wisdom is that even on a rookie contract in the NFL, that you can do better. I first made this prediction a year or maybe even 2 ago. I have yet to see it happen, but it's going to happen. You're going to see a superstar running back in a program that's going to decide eventually to come back for his senior year, because the way that the NFL, again, they're not going to change the bargaining agreement here to where running backs are ever going to be, quote unquote, fairly compensated. You're going to see a running back. It's going to happen within the next couple of years that's going to stick around, play his senior season in college, and pocket that money so that it won't count against him when he goes to the NFL on the rookie deal.
That's a great point, Rick.
Thank you.
An outstanding point. Yes. You're going to see a $6, $7, $8 million running back that's not going to get that in a rookie contract. That's a great point.
Thanks.
Does it's still pretty new right now? You're seeing guys that because I think a lot of people agree that there should be some type of stipend, that if you're going to wear a player's jersey or at least his number, it doesn't have to have the name, but if you are wearing the number, you're representing the guy who is catching touchdowns or throwing touchdowns or sacking the quarterback a bunch of times. He should get a little bit of a stipend. He should be able to go to an autograph signing at a car dealership or whatever. But then it gets to how do you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. But does this change the parity of college football, that the cream doesn't always rise to the top, that not every big time recruit is going to go to your Ohio States, your Alabamas, your Clemsons, your whatever, your Texas, that this gives an opportunity for, I don't know, Purdue, for example. If there's a big-time Midwestern running back or a quarterback who could go, obviously, to Ohio State, but Purdue says, well, we also got a nice big blank check for you if you want to come here. So would that give an opportunity and an incentive to say, I will take less money to play at Ohio State or take more money in college, because nothing's guaranteed in the NFL, especially with injuries from head injuries and knee injuries, that maybe I'll go to Purdue. Maybe I'll make a star out of myself in West Lafayette.
Well, you're seeing a little bit of that with Michigan, with Larry Ellison from Oracle stepping up, because people are starting to look at it now like, if we're talking billionaires possibly getting involved here, that takes it to a whole nother level. They bought, what, a $10 million quarterback from LSU? And I was looking at this, and here's something that folks in the Buckeye State are going to like, because I start looking at this like, well, what are other deep sources of money that are out there in the world, and folks that can throw it around? Well, how about the Saudis, with the way that they're trying to sports wash all of their many atrocities up and down the line here? Wait till they start getting involved in a program. And I'm looking at it like, what program would they get involved in? And I'm looking at this like, well, first and foremost, they're influence peddlers. So if they're looking at the 2028 presidential landscape, I think they're investing in the Ohio State Buckeyes. Suck up to J.D. Vance. You heard it here first.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, it's because like you said, that what they're doing with this this golf league right now. I mean, because you would think, just like with what we saw, the small potatoes with the USFL back in the day, that who's going to topple the PGA? Well, for the right price, there may be an opportunity for it.
And now I guess there's about to have the merger or whatever. So, I'm sure you've heard about that, Ken. But yeah, I mean, they're close to possibly working that out finally, I guess.
And they are. It's as close as it's ever been, Rick. I play golf, but I follow golf very closely. It's as close as it's ever been, but it leaves that bad taste in your mouth. And for you knew it was getting closer when they were getting rid of the shark. Okay, when they threw Greg Norman out, you knew it was getting close.
Yeah, the shark got thrown under the bus, so to speak.
yeah. He's no mud shark.
I'll be seeing him next week down in the Key West, Florida. Chad Zumach, our good friend. So yeah, I mean, it's when you look at the whole landscape of sports, that things have really changed from when all of us were, and I understand I'm a little bit younger, but it's changed so much since then. And you still have baseball doesn't have a salary cap, but there's a lot more guaranteed money in football now. Basketball is going on, hockey. Actually, I want to ask you guys about hockey a little bit too, because I live in an area where we've had long-standing AHL, IHL hockey, but we haven't had the NHL team except for about a year and a half of the Cleveland Barons back in the day. They made it to 2 years, but they almost didn't finish that second season because of going bankrupt. And then eventually became didn't they merge with the North Stars, I believe, right?
I believe so, yes. And then the Guns subsequently, I think, bought into the Sharks.
Yes.
I don't know. North Stars became the Dallas Stars, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, that was by the 90s.
Yeah.
And
that was the Cleveland Browns before the Cleveland Browns, with the Minnesota North Stars moving out of there.
So it's funny because it was funny talking about the tariff situation between Canada and the United States, and somebody made a joke saying like, "Talk to me when you actually have a competitive NHL team who will win a Stanley Cup." It's been since, and also just right around that time I played that Leon Lett thing was the last time a Canadian team won the Stanley Cup with the Canadiens in 1993. So. When you talk about the regionalized aspect of hockey, it's a very niche sport. And I've talked about this a lot of how that is hyper niche, because if you're a hockey player, especially in North America, there's not a lot of arenas to go to. So you can be a fan, but if you want to play, well, you're going to have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you have to get your pads on and get about a half hour of ice time even before you get to school. And it's expensive with the leagues and the equipment and everything.
You're right
It's
on,
amazing.
Tony. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. You're right on. All of the rinks down here, where I'm at, right, right by Atlantic City, have closed. So, but even before any opened, the kids were going to Bricktown, okay, an hour and a half up at 4 o'clock in the morning. My friends would drive their kids up there for ice time. But then you had the Flyer skate zone in Atlantic City that ended up closing down. At the places in Mays Landing that ended close, and they're back going to Bricktown. And you're right, from down here, but I tell you that, the fan bases of hockey, even, out in the warm weather hockey towns now, they are tight. Hockey is a specific kind of sport that really grows a fan base.
I was, and I want to interrupt you because I was just down in Sunrise, Florida, a couple of months ago, and I went to a Panthers game, and I'm thinking, just like with the Marlins, no one really cares about the Marlins. You're only going to a Marlins game because your team from the north, whether you're from, you're a Mets fan, they're playing the Marlins. You're like, all right, well, I'll see my Mets in my new hometown of, Hallandale Beach or whatever, and yet this team has won a Stanley Cup now and been to another, and it actually has a pretty good following. Then you go across the state to Tampa Bay, and again, I was shocked. This is Tampa. They don't even support they barely support their football team. They certainly don't support their baseball team, yet they have big time support. What is it about hockey that has this dedicated fan base that you can pluck a team from the snowy Arctic areas of Canada and put them in Arizona and they still have a following?
It's 40 home games as opposed to 81 home games, right? Something like that. But I just think if you're a hockey fan, you're a hockey fan, and hockey has been able to grow that.
Well, and another thing here too, Tony. So you mentioned Florida, you mentioned Tampa. I'm going to throw Dallas in the mix, Vegas in the mix. What do they have in common the last couple of years, or further back even? They're very successful.
Success.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hockey does well in the Sun Belt when it's successful. It is one of these things where, remember when Nashville made the finals in 2017, it was Smashville and everybody was behind them. When they were first there, I remember that like there were country music stars that were doing billboards with like blacked out teeth, like trying to get people in the South to understand what hockey was all about. And it's a blue collar sport, you're blue collar people. But it's a thing where since this expansion into the South, that's what it's been. It's been a matter of if you're really good, people will be there, they'll care, they'll support the team. It's a fun thing. It's easy for people to get their hooks into it when that's happening. When it's going bad, when you're going through a rebuild, if you'd have gone down to Sunrise, Florida, 5, 8, however many years ago, Tony, you wouldn't have seen a fraction of what you saw there.
Yeah, it's true, and especially there are certain. I don't. Why is this? There are certain fan bases that are just really strong, and others that are not. And Atlanta is one of them. Atlanta has lost 2 NHL teams. They lost the Flames. They lost the Thrashers, and it's just a weird sports town. I had a friend of mine who was he was a sports talker he did middays in Charlotte, and he hit me up for a job here in Cleveland when I was my brief time as a program director. And I said, "Why did you want to leave? I mean, you're in Charlotte. You're midday host. That's pretty good." And he said, "Because it's a weird sports town. They don't really care that much about the Panthers because they're a relatively new team. They'll go because it's again there's 8 home games." They have the Hornets, but they lost the Hornets. They got them back, and they haven't been successful. No one goes to the games. They're a NASCAR town. They're a college basketball state in North Carolina. So he's like, it's so strange to do sports talk in a town that it's the football fans. There are Steeler fans from Pittsburgh who came down because Charlotte's a little bit warmer than Pittsburgh. And it's odd how some fan bases still have these pockets of that the hockey team's more is more popular than the football team, or the baseball team, like in Cincinnati or St. Louis, is more popular than the football team. Or what goes on in Detroit is that up until a couple of years ago, no one cared about the football team. They cared about the Michigan Wolverines football team, not the Detroit Lions. So it's really interesting. What are your guys' observations of some of these the good sports towns versus the bad sports towns?
Go ahead, Rick.
Well, again, Detroit is sort of a hardy perennial on that. I go both ways on Cleveland because there's a lot of bad fans here, and some of the toxicity from the Browns fan base, and I would say toxic positivity since 2022 of a lot of the dweebs around here that thought the Watson deal was a great one and didn't want to admit that it was wrong until they could, pretend that they never said it in the first place. But there are, I can see where Carolina would be kind of a weird market. Philly is one that they get a lot of flack, but Philly is one that's always very passionate. Boston the same way. I don't make the allowances for Boston that I do for Philly, nor do I really, generally speaking, for the most part with New York. I want to make a point about Carolina that's just go down a slight cul-de-sac here because it's a callback to something we were talking about before, and that is the Carolina Tar Heels there. It is very, very obvious to me that Belichick, or maybe if I'm rocking this jersey, maybe I should be calling him Bozo Choke still, right? Very obvious to me he didn't want to go to the SEC or the Big Ten. He could be in the playoffs next year. He's going to have a $20 million budget there. Ain't nothing holding you back in the ACC, brother. But that's just a side note. But yeah, there are some pretty strong markets out there. And St. Louis, as you would say, but before I would include that in there. So.
Well, my reason is going to be a little bit abstract. I'm going to have a little fun with it. But, Belichick, North Carolina, that's where his dad coached.
Yep.
His dad coached there, and he coached there as well really early in his career. So I think he was going back to his roots because he knew his NFL career was over.
Yeah.
So now he gets to be around a whole bunch of young co-eds. But my reference, yeah, that's right. My reference is more abstract. I blame Jack Elway. That's who I blame. John Elway's dad. Because there's been so much movement with players jumping around, not want to be drafted by certain teams. It happened with Eli. It's going to happen with Shedeur Sanders, and people are complaining about Deion getting involved. And why can't Deion get involved? Archie Manning got involved. Jack Elway got involved. What if John Elway went to Baltimore, to the Baltimore Colts, an iconic franchise, and went there? Would they have ever moved? Would they ever move to Indianapolis? No. They would have built around John Elway the way Denver did. And that was an iconic franchise down there. And I know my example here is abstract, but I think there's been that kind of movement around where great players coming out of college, whatever the sport, could have gone to this team, but because I don't want to get drafted there, I don't want to go there, it's too cold there, or it's too warm there, I don't have enough money there, I don't want to raise kids there. I look at it that way. I look at, players coming out of schools and dictating where they think they can go, because they could turn around a franchise. Okay.
Yeah.
I know, I can see the look on your faces, but that's
no. I hear what you're saying, because
that's
I was gonna predate it a couple of years before Elway was Catfish Hunter in baseball. When you have the advent of free agency, is that when you start to allow teams that now I think you have a certain amount of service time in the league, and you should be able to kind of say like, look, I've proven myself, I'm proven my worth. Charlie O'Finley's, he's screwing me over here, and I got to do something, get a decent payday. But then, like you said, it's now to the point where in college football, I don't really like the turf all that well here, so I'm going to enter the transfer portal. And it truly is the inmates running the asylum, and that's a great point, Ken, that I didn't even think of, is that when John Elway's like, I am not playing for the Baltimore Colts. If you draft me, I'm still not going to play. Now, Bo Jackson had a good reason, because there was that whole tampering situation with Tampa Bay. But a lot of them said, well, like Eli, I refuse to play for this team. I'm not going to do it. And the teams basically they shrug their shoulders because, okay, we can keep him, but he's going to be disgruntled. He's not going to play well for us. He's going to bring down the morale of the team. So we really have no say, especially when you're dealing with the Scott Borases and other super agents of the world.
To me, that was the beginning of the undermining of where players who could go and help a franchise and rebuild a franchise. To me, that was the beginning of the degradation of what these guys could do and what families could do. I've always felt if Elway had gone to Baltimore, and I'm just staying with that one, if he had gone to Baltimore, he would have turned that franchise around. Eli not going to San Diego, not wanting to go to San Diego. Look, Eli's best moments were in the playoffs. He's not a first ballot Hall of Famer. I've said that for years, and it came true. He's not. Will he get there someday? Yes. I don't think he gets there next year. I really don't. What? Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, Ken, I always used to make the joke at the time, 08 and 12, those were the years he went to the Super Bowl, that Eli Manning was only an elite quarterback after the Iowa caucuses. If he didn't get a chance to play after the Iowa caucuses, he wasn't in there. But I will say this also, too, Ken, and not to date myself, but what you said about Elway, I'm going to date myself again. I mean, if Burt Jones could have kept him in Baltimore, don't you think John Elway could have?
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely, Rick. Yes.
Because then what happened after that is then now that became the owners holding cities hostage, as we saw with Baltimore, where you have the Mayflower trucks in the middle of the night heading out to Indianapolis, and that they blocked certain highways off to make sure that everything was kept secret heading out 70 east or 70 west towards Indianapolis. Then
there was a version of that in Cleveland in 05, Tony.
Where was the Mayflower Company headquartered at that time? Where were they headquartered? Where did all those trucks come from? About 5 miles over my shoulder here.
Really?
They were headquartered. Yes, they were headquartered on the border of Pleasantville and Absecon, New Jersey, right there.
That's and then after that, it turned into, well, I want my stadium, I want my baby. And after what happened with Art Modell, where in the 1980s, the Browns were arguably one of the most successful teams on the field. But as far as the pocketbook, they lost money every single year but one during those times. And, from Brian Sipe to Bernie Kosar, you would think that the dog pound, everyone's barking, Arsenio Hall's doing the woof, woof, woof on his show, and yet they were losing money to the point where Art Modell is trying to take out a loan to get Andre Rison's contract to be a part of the team in 95. Teams 5-3, they end up moving to Baltimore. Well, what happened after that? The next year, Houston Oilers like, yep, I wanted my stadium too, so now I'm leaving. And that started holding cities and counties and hostage for syntax and everything by saying, well, now I want my stadium, or I'm going to move to Vegas. I'm going to move to Charlotte. I'm going to move here. I'm going to move here. And now these stadiums, you think about it, it's now been 30 years. A lot of those stadiums are now in need of replacement, or they're being replaced. The Georgia Dome has already been torn down. The Browns Stadium is going to be obsolete in a couple of years.
Already, years ago.
Yeah, it's already not too good right now. They ain't lasting, these the Fenways and the Wrigleys anymore. These are you're going to get about 20, 25 years out of these stadiums. They're going to want a new stadium, or they're going to leave.
By the way, Tony, this would be the greatest, now it can be told, of all time. Uncle Artie fishing around for a loan. If we were to find out subsequently that it was Left Eye that financed it, that would be the greatest one ever.
Hey, Tony, and Rick, the big controversy in Philly, which is 60 miles this way, Rick, the link where the Eagles play, they want to tear that down and do what Jerry did in Dallas. They want a new stadium for the link, and they want a new stadium for the Eagles, a new stadium for the Flyers and the Sixers to use. Mixed use, they have that, what I forget what it's called there, Tony, what they have there now in that area now, but they want to redo all that. And the link is a beautiful stadium, and they want to move on from that. But who was it that, and I hate to go back to Brian Sipe, but who was it? Rod Martin, he threw that interception to. Who was that?
I think
Mike Davis.
Yeah.
Red right 88, Mike Davis.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was the linebacker.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was, and by the way, I'll say, Ken, that what you're talking about there with Philadelphia, and I hadn't heard that, but I mean, I've already heard talk that Jerry might be like casting his eyes maybe to like Frisco, Texas, for something even bigger and better on that. But I go back to 2017. My brother's family lives in Atlanta. I go down there frequently to visit them, usually at the holidays, but I happened to be down there during baseball season. And they took me to a game at the new ballpark the first year that it was there. And it was a thing where I went there, and as somebody who's fascinated by sports business stuff, I know how much over the decades, no matter who's owned the Cubs, they've always been seething about Wrigleyville. These damn parasites. You know what? The Braves built their own Wrigleyville. I'm just looking around like this is it. They built the dream. I mean, it's just, you have you have condos that are so expensive there that some players bought condos there because it's like a 2-minute walk to the ballpark, and concert facilities and retail and all this kind of stuff. And that's the thing, Ken. All these damn greedy owners, they want their own Wrigleyville. That's the dream.
And look what Steve Cohen is, the owner of the Mets. Look what he's doing.
Yeah.
He bought so much of that land around Citi Field.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dump out there now, but I've seen the plans. They put him somewhere where I was looking at him. He wants to build a casino, which would hurt us here in Atlantic City. Hotels. He wants to build out that whole area and make that neighborhood beautiful. And someday the Mets will be worth, 10, 12, 14 billion dollars because of everything he's doing. But you're right about Jerry going towards Frisco because he's I forget what he's building. He's not building a stadium, but he's expanding. But that's where he gets his income. He's a businessman, and that's what some of these owners need to do. But they're not doing that. They're getting their TV money and they're putting it in their pocket. A lot of them are. Okay?
Oh yeah, the Dolans do that in town. I hate that all the time. But they're crappy owners. I mean, they get bailed out by their front office. And sometimes by the manager, but yeah, I mean, you preach on that one, Ken, because we would live with that crap.
That's what George Steinbrenner said back in the day was that he's all this tax that he's putting on there, and the Pirates and the Royals and the Indians and all these other small market teams just pocket it and then cry.
What they're doing. Yeah.
Welfare.
Now, do you think you mentioned a couple of those stadiums and the plans? So back in the 70s, because a lot of downtowns were frankly dumps, they fell on hard times because of recession and crime and everything, that the Detroit Lions moved out of Tiger Stadium in Michigan and Trumbull and headed up 30 miles north up to Pontiac. Eventually the Pistons did too, and then they got their own home in Auburn Hills. The aforementioned Cleveland Cavaliers went down to Richfield, which is halfway between Cleveland and Akron. And then South Philly, even though that whole complex is technically Philadelphia, but it's enough away from a downtown. And then Jerry World is in Arlington. Do you think there's going to be a little bit more of a trend back to that of regionalism, as opposed to that focus in the 90s and 2000s of going into a more urban area and having everything downtown, and after the game you go bar hopping? Or do you create your own downtown in the middle of nowhere? Are we going to see that a little bit going forward?
I think that's what's happening, Tony. That's what's happening. And you mentioned Jerry. I mentioned the Mavericks earlier, and the Edelsons, who own the Mavericks now, 73% of it. They bought the former the 108 acres that was Texas Stadium, the original home of not the original home of the Cowboys. It was the first one that they built. They were in the Yale Bowl or whatever that was called, Cotton Bowl back then. But they bought it because they want to build a casino there in Texas, and they want to build a stadium for the Mavericks. And of course, the Dallas legislature is telling them to go pound sand. They just turned them down again in January of this year, and they only look at it every 2 years. But just to your point, yes, the answer to your question is yes. They want to go to areas where they can build out and create a city within a city, a town center, so to speak, which has become very popular over the last 20 years here in New Jersey, and other places now are starting to copy it. So yes, a town center type deal, Tony. Yeah, you're correct about that. I think they're all looking to do something like that to bring people in. It's got to have the mixed use though. It's got to be the the residential, the commercial, sports, whatever. But it has to have all the components.
Is that sustainable though?
Oh hell yeah. Yes, absolutely. But I'll say this to you. These billionaire owners have to put up more of their money. They can't keep doing this stuff, 60, 70% on the backs of the taxpayers. Then, Tony, it's not sustainable. It won't work. The
Well,
tax,
because
the
I
tax
think a lot
base
of it was
can't
the
keep
promise.
supporting that.
Because what, Rick, did you go to WrestleMania 3? Did you go to that one?
I've never been to a WrestleMania. No.
Okay. I talked to somebody, I don't know who it was, who was
Okay.
at the Silverdome back in the day. And I think what
Okay.
it was in those days was, we're going to build this brand new state-of-the-art facility here in Pontiac and Auburn Hills and Richfield, Ohio, and whatever. And everybody's going to come to us. The problem is nobody really came to them. And that it started becoming a problem where, yeah, it's great for the people of Flint, Michigan, if they want to go see the Lions, that they don't have to drive all the way to downtown Detroit. They just drive 15 minutes down there, or 15 miles. But then when you go to the game, and then after the game is done, whether win or lose, it's like, hey, let's go to the bars. Oh, there's no bars around here. There's nothing over here. So I guess, like when I was talking about sustainability, there has to be that promise. Now, Rick, as you said, that going up to Cobb County in Atlanta, where that they're, you don't have to be in downtown Atlanta. You don't have to be in Fulton County anymore. You don't have to be right off 75. That you can build this whole city outside the city, as long as there's Truist Bank and all these other areas are able to pony up those resources for it. So I guess that it kind of is my way of going back to what we've been talking about with the sustainability of sports, is that sure, you want to be around a big football stadium, but you only have about 9 to 12 events a year at that football stadium. So you have to ensure the Rolling Stones and Lady Gaga and Kendrick Lamar and everybody else is going to play there. Whereas you also have baseball that has 81 games, but it's not going to sell out. You're not going to have 40,000 people at every game. So it's going to be interesting as far as that business of sports goes, if you're going to create a district. And we're going to see it here in the next couple of years in Brook Park, Ohio, where the new proposed stadium, this new domed stadium, is going to be built right down the street from you, Rick, which would be nice. You can just
I could
Uber
walk
up
there in a half hour, but I'm not looking forward to all the crap that's going to come with it.
Oh, like the ticket prices that you get to go see Deshaun Watson tear another Achilles or ACL and pay $200 for nosebleeds.
Yeah, I mean, and you look at that, and with what you said about like Richfield, and that was a thing where ironic that you mentioned Richfield the same way as the Pontiac Silverdome, because notable for Silverdome having WrestleMania 3, the biggest pay-per-view event of the 80s. The first two Survivor Series were actually in Richfield. I was at the third one in '92 when it was there.
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, I confused Survivor Series.
Yeah. So I was there for that. And here's one of the things, though, and this is what's fascinating to me, is that like they looked at it and it's like, well, it's the best of both worlds. You can get the Cleveland people coming, and you can get the Akron people coming, but you got nothing around it now, such that it's basically, a national park. It's basically been turned into meadowland now that it's been sort of reclaimed by nature. I felt like, and I wrote a column on the FDH Lounge blog, probably, this would have been maybe a little bit more than a decade ago, that because the whole thing, like when LA was really starting to get serious about looking for NFL teams, and I'm like, look, you don't have enough people in LA, gigantic as it is, to care about the NFL. They might have proved me wrong about this, but I felt they oversaturated it with two teams. Typical NFL, no teams for 20 years, two teams in the blink of an eye. But what I was thinking was the way to solve it would have been the SoCal Chargers. Yeah, I picked out a city. I think it was Oceanside. That was like right in between there.
Like Camp Pendleton.
Done that. Imagine if you could have drawn from LA and San Diego. That was my thought. You could have just built an oasis around there, mixed use, like Ken's saying. They didn't listen to me. They did it their way. And I can't say that they're suffering for it, but that was my idea at the time.
Well, they built a hell of a stadium out there that those two teams share. It's a heck of a stadium. But as you're speaking, I started thinking about the Rose Bowl, where the Rams, the original Rams, played all those years ago. And that was, I get it. That was a big place. But, the more I think about it, they never led the league in attendance. They had some great teams, Merlin Olsen and, those guys, Deacon Jones.
Rosie
Greer. Yeah. But they I'm just trying to think. I don't think they ever led the league in attendance. And there were a lot of empty seats there, but it was nowhere near perfect for football. If you know that back end there.
It's funny. I was joking, that they should have started a change.org petition before they ended up moving the game due to the wildfires. That, like, for any old school NFL fans there, that Rams and Vikings game should have been at the LA Coliseum. Like, you should, it should be like mandatory that you just go play it in the place that deserves it.
And it's a great place. It's an iconic place. It is a great place.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the last things I want to mention is about sports fandom in general, about how it is very hyper regionalized. Now, in California, we're mentioning that there's still a large contingent of Raiders fans out there. So it really is split between the Rams, the Chargers, and a team who hasn't been there in 30 years. But so, obviously you have that, but a lot of that was from the cultural movement in the early 90s with Ice Cube and stuff. But the Lakers have been out there, as have the Clippers, but there's about 2 Clippers fans out there. And the only reason you're a Clippers fan is you hate the Lakers. The Angels started up 3 years after the Dodgers moved out there, yet there's only a smattering of Angels fans. It's Dodger blue. However, New York City and New Jersey and where you're at, Ken, it's so strange who's a fan of what. And I would have thought it would have been like the old school people would have been Yankees, Giants, Rangers.
There's a lot of that.
And Knicks. And then everybody else is just because you hate everyone. But now, as younger generations have become fans and some teams are more relevant than others, you're getting a mix of, like, a Jets fan is also a Yankees fan, is also a Devils fan. And sometimes it doesn't even make sense.
Well, Tony, you may know this story, and I'll try to be brief. Rick, you don't know the story. So I grew up down here, the Atlantic Ocean. Well, we're backwards here. The Atlantic Ocean is that way. Okay. So I grew up on the island here, and we were cabled back in the 50s, which was before I was born. We were cabled. We had channels 2 to 13. Channel 3 was NBC, which was the AFC. Channel 4 was CBS, which was the NFC. Every Sunday, Rick, was doubleheader Sunday. The blackout rules were different. Wow. It was just every Sunday. So, I have an older brother who was a Bob Lilly fan and loved the star in the helmet. Mm-hmm. He's a few years older than I am. So who did we see every week? The Eagles were terrible. Giants were terrible. The Jets, because of Joe Namath, we saw Joe Namath. But who did we see every single week? The Minnesota Vikings, the Dallas Cowboys, San Francisco 49ers, the Chicago Bears, Gale Sayers. Just think of the original Los Angeles Rams. They're the teams we saw. Oakland Raiders. We saw them every weekend, every single weekend. And in the late 60s, early 70s, when the NFL jackets came out and they were popular, they were thin. They were thin. Which jacket was the number one jacket down here?
The Jets?
Yes. Not far from where you guys are, I don't think. The Pittsburgh Steelers.
Really?
Wow.
By far. And
really?
People say, well, why? Well, what did we need down here in South Jersey in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, even into the 70s? We needed new schools. We needed new roads, infrastructure. Where were they coming from? Where were the engineers coming from? Western Pennsylvania colleges. Where are the teachers coming from? Western Pennsylvania colleges. So they had all these transplants down here. That's the way it was back in the day. Steelers were number 1. Packers were number 2. We're getting a lot of transplants down here because of what the jobs were. Planners were needed, engineers, teachers, doctors, lawyers. It's where they were coming from all over. This was where the money was. The money was really, starting to, come into this area. Of course, we had Atlantic City. It was heyday until the '64 convention. It was heyday, Then, of course, after all that, bad publicity, it started to go south.
Yeah. Extremism in the pursuit of liberty is not a vice.
Yes.
It is just interesting how because I was watching something on this. That's why I mentioned about how the New York sports teams, that they were basically, you became a Mets fan because you were either a Dodgers fan or a Giants fan, that they left and they combined the colors and took the took the Giants logo and had the Dodgers blue and were able to make the Mets. And then eventually you had the Jets come around, and we all know Joe Namath, and they, AFL finally beating the NFL and stuff like that. But then eventually you have the Nets and other teams that were like distinctly Jersey, that are like, no, we are a New Jersey. We're the New Jersey Nets until 2012. And we're going to go over to Brooklyn. And it's so interesting how some people will become fans that they're not around. It's not just your hometown team, because sometimes you don't have a team in your hometown. Like I didn't have a hockey team, so I had to find some team. I don't know. I don't really remember who I rooted for. I did like the Cleveland Lumberjacks back in the day with Jock Calendar, but yeah, it was always who was my other team if I don't have a team in town. And I was always fascinated by how New York had so many teams. Who do you root for? Like, is there a pattern? And I was fascinated to know that there was at one time a pattern, and that's kind of been upended because some teams have been more successful than others.
You know what, Tony? It's so funny because I found out years later I had the same origin story as John Buchagras, because he went to college somewhere in Ohio here. I went to the Harvard on the Hocking, Ohio University. And I think his story is the same as mine, that like coming from an area that didn't really have much hockey coverage, didn't have a whole lot of awareness or whatever. I'd never heard of Steve Yzerman before college. And I get to the newsroom at the WOUB down there. And I'm like, who's this Steve Yzerman? And he became my favorite athlete ever, Red Wings fan for life. And Buchagras, I guess, same thing, fell in love with Yzerman and the Red Wings. In my case, it was 87. I don't know where he was on the timeline, but yeah, I mean, it's funny how these things happen.
Hey, Tony, I don't know how much longer you want to go, but before we wrap up, I think there should be a couple minutes on Aaron Rodgers. There should be a couple minutes on Daniel Jones.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Sam Darnold. There's going to be some quarterback movement. I think it's really going to be interesting. So as far as Rodgers, that was no surprise with the new coach, who's a no nonsense coach. They're parting ways with him. I think there's a good chance he goes out to the Raiders. I don't know a lot of other places where he would go. Now, the rumor today was Daniel Jones to the Jets, maybe, which I think would be interesting. And if that happens, I think Minnesota, they have that young quarterback, I know. But what do you do with Sam Darnold, who they have a great coach in Minnesota. I really like him. Resurrected his career.
Darnold to the Jets?
Yeah.
Let's run it back there.
Rick, that was great. Yes.
Thank you.
My prediction, I would say, I'm going to say Kirk Cousins is going to be the Cleveland Browns starting quarterback next year. I'll tell you that much.
Oy vey.
Kirk Cousins will be there because he knows Kevin Stefanski. Stefanski knows him. That was his quarterback up in Minnesota. They basically, for the last couple of years, he's been trying to make the Cleveland Browns the East Coast Vikings. I think that's what's going to happen. And if you're the Cleveland Browns, you're dealing with Deshaun Watson, who is making TikTok videos and injures himself once again. And you're not going to bring it back Jameis Winston or anything like that. So when I'm seeing on the scroll on the crawl on ESPN, they're like, "Oh, the Browns are interested in Daniel Jones or
of course they
or
are.
Kirk Cousins." I'm like, "Yep, I'm probably gonna skip a couple of games next year. I'm probably gonna do something else. I'm gonna watch reruns of the Puppy Bowl next year, I guess."
Yeah. I don't really have too many insights about where guys are going at this point here, but something I do want to say to you, Ken, in the interest of, in the spirit of new friends here, I do want to note that the FDH Lounge, we have an ultimate links page here, 2024 links in 48 easy to navigate categories. One of them is worthwhile causes. And when I go to update it this weekend, guess what's going up on there? Faces for Autism. So
here you go. Yeah, listen, you're the best. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Great cause. God bless you.
Yep. Very thoughtful. I appreciate that. I'm going to let my wife know, and I know she'll be pleased.
Yeah, I'll make sure you get the link. Yeah,
I hope so. Yeah.
See, the Check Your Brain podcast brings everybody together.
There you go.
It splits people apart too if you listen long enough, but other people it brings together.
Don't listen to the negative people.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm negative enough for everybody. But hey, Ken Ken Mosca, Rick Morris, thank you for joining me on the podcast. And it's good to have you both on here. I figured, you know what? I could talk to one of you. I could spread it out and give myself an extra podcast. So I'm like, you know what? Let's just do one big one. Just
Awesome.
talk sports, talk the business. That's what I liked about this. It wasn't so much we talked Super Bowl because everybody has already discussed it. We've discussed it in general. So we touched on it. What do we do going forward and the business of sports? And I like that. So I'm going to put that in the show notes and promote that. So I was very happy about it. Ken, once again, Faces for Autism, faces4 autism.org. You have a comedy show. Anything else you have going on with that and anything you want to plug, Ken?
Now, I get the comedy show. It's going to be July the 10th. I'm working on the show now, so I'm excited. I've had some great comics over the years. Tony, if you and your lovely bride want to come up here, I'll put you up as my guest at the venue. It's a beautiful place. Love to have you. I think our friend, the Mud Shark Z-Man, Cleveland's best, I think he's going to make an appearance. So it'd be nice to have, some friends around. There we go. Rick, it's been a real pleasure getting to know you.
Likewise. Thank you.
We get a chance to do this again. I've really enjoyed the heck out of it. And I appreciate, Rick, what you did and adding us. I think that's great. Much appreciated. We've been doing this a long time. We've helped a lot of families, and it's actually, I guess we're going into the next chapter. Kyle's a twin. He has a twin sister, my daughter Isabel, who you saw. They turned 26 on Sunday. But now the next chapter is what happens someday when I'm pushing up daisies, when we're not around. What happens to our kids as they become young adults and such like that. Where are they going to live? Where are they going? These are the things that we work on. Thankfully, I'm in a position where, we put things in order, for Kyle. But we're doing that for all these families. We're putting things in order. So when they're not around anymore, their child, I still say children with autism, will have a safe home and excellent care for them.
Well, yeah, God bless you. What a great cause. And it's just been, really wonderful to be on here tonight. And I will say this, when I say that, thank you there, Tony, there it is.
FantasyDraftHelp.com. Go check out all things Rick Morris, and go contact him here. Check out his podcast, his video cast, and everything else, and his writing and just everything. All things Rick Morris here.
I appreciate that. When I say that you guys redeemed my evening, I don't say that lightly, okay? I'm the president in my HOA. We had an annual meeting tonight. We're going to attempt at one. We only got like 16% authorization, so try landslide mandate by apathy, right? But then I had to have a board meeting with these puds, and it just was like, and they're keeping me. And I'm like, Tony Mazur needs
how do you spell board?
Yeah.
Is it BORED?
Oh, my God, they wouldn't shut up. If they listen to this, I don't care. But they wouldn't shut up. So it's like, you guys redeemed my evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. And thank you, everybody, for listening and watching this podcast. I'll be back with you with another free episode next week. If you're on the podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, all that fun stuff. And if you want more content from me, why would you? Go to patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur. That is me. I am Tony Mazur. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I'll be back with you next week here on the Check Your Brain podcast. Bye, everyone.